In this example, we're going to look at factors and divisibility. So let's just remind ourselves what this means, and I'm going to use an example. 3 times 4 equals 12. So we call, remember from the multiplication section, we say 3 and 4 are factors of 12. Because you can multiply either 3 or 4 by another number and get the answer 12. Since we'll use 12 divided by 4 equals 3 without any remainder, and I'm going to write remainder 0, even though we never really write this, but it's an important part of the divisibility. Since 12 divided by 4 equals 3 with no remainder or remainder 0, this means 12 is divisible by 4. So let's highlight these. 3 and 4 are factors of 12, and 12 is divisible by 4. So notice we're going to use these two words somewhat interchangeably. So you can say that 3 is a factor of 12, and you can say that 12 is divisible by 3. And lots of times when we're finding factors, we actually use divisibility to determine if something is a factor. So let's look at our examples. Rewrite the factor questions as divisibility questions and the divisibility questions as factor questions. So we're given different forms and we want to rewrite them the other way so we can connect the two ideas. Determine the answer to the questions and justify your work. So, is 4 a factor of 30 is equivalent to asking, in terms of divisibility, is 30 divisible by 4? So, to determine if 4 is a factor of 30, we need to see if it's divisible by 4, which means if we divide 30 by 4, is there no remainder? So let's see. Let's do 30 divided by 4. Well, 30 goes into 4 7 times, and that's 28, and there would be 2 left over. So since the remainder isn't 0, we would say no. 4 is not a factor of 30. Okay. So notice we were asked a factor question, but we actually solved it by using divisibility and showing that there's a remainder left over. So another way you could show this is say 4 times 7 is 28, and then you could say 4 times 8 is 32, and then there's nothing you can multiply that's an integer between them. But that's a little more complicated, so we usually just state that we found when you divide it, there's a remainder, therefore it's not a factor. Let's look at the next one. Is 30 divisible by 6? So as a factor question, this is asking, is 6 a factor of 30? Okay. So notice these are equivalent statements, and notice how the order changes when you write it. Okay. So we can use divisibility to check this, or division, excuse me. If we divide 30 by 6, it goes in exactly 5 times with no remainder. So we would say yes. 30 is divisible by 6 because it divides in without a remainder. Okay, so I'm using this as my justification. Let's look at the next one. Is 7 a factor of 21? As a divisibility question, this is asking, is 21 divisible by 7? Well, if I take 21 and I divide it by 7, I get exactly 3, and there's no remainder, so that means it's divisible by 7, and equivalently, 7 is a factor of 21. So our answer is yes, and I'm going to write 7 is a factor of 21. Okay, so notice again, we were asked a factor question, but we actually used division or the equivalent divisibility question to determine that there was no remainder and therefore it's a factor. Let's look at the last one. Is 4 divisible by 8? So let's write the equivalent factor question. That would be, is 8 a factor of 4? Okay. And it may be really tempting to immediately say, well, yeah, 4 times 2 is 8. Okay, so it's going to be divisible by 8. But in actuality, 8 is divisible by 4, but 4 is not divisible by 8. So notice if we divided 4 divided by 8, let's make a little picture of what this would look like. So here's 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I want to divide this into groups of size 8. Well, notice I don't even have 8, so there's 0 groups of 8. And we could say there's 4 left over. So this is 0 times 8 plus 4. Okay, so notice there is a remainder. The 4 are left over. So this is 0, remainder 4. So 4 is not divisible by 8. Okay, so I intentionally put in this question so you can see the relationship between the factor questions and the divisibility questions, but also on this one how the order of the numbers in the question matters. Okay, if we're asking if 4 is divisible by 8, the answer is no. If we divide 4 by 8, we get a remainder that's greater than 0. The reverse is true. 8 is divisible by 4, or 4 is a factor of 8 because 4 times 2 equals 8. So you need to be comfortable with this language and realize how the order matters, or else sometimes you'll say something is true when really the reverse order is true.